In a beautiful talk that His Holiness gave on developing compassion, he began with these words. He said, I think every human being has an innate sense of I. We cannot explain why that feeling is there, but it is. And along with it comes a desire for happiness and a wish to overcome suffering. And this is justified because we have a natural right to achieve as much happiness as possible. And we also have a right to overcome suffering. The whole of human history has developed on the basis of this feeling. So very simply, if we think about our own experiences of happiness, we could say that happiness seems to come from two causes in general, external causes and internal causes. And we know a whole lot about external causes because we're chasing them all day long. Nice sights, nice sounds, nice smells, nice tastes, nice thoughts, nice environments, right? 24 hours a day, that's what we're doing, even in our dreams. Maybe we're not quite as familiar with the internal causes of happiness. And these really narrow down to positive states of mind and the positive actions that they initiate. The Buddha observed that all happiness arises from virtue, and all suffering arises from non-virtue. Or another way of saying that is that all happiness arises from these positive states of mind that actually accord with reality. There's no distortion to them, at least on a conventional level. And negative states of mind have some kind of misunderstanding, some overestimation, some decoration, some exaggeration involved in them, but we often don't recognize that. And so I have found this description or this diagram of the mind. You know, we're made up of a body and a mind, and science tells us a lot about the body, but it doesn't tell us a lot about the mind. And this is where I think Buddhism fills in the gaps. So for me, this diagram has been very helpful, kind of like a user's manual. This is how your mind works in a nutshell. So if we think about consciousness as the larger category, then we have what we call main minds or primary minds. And we know these terms, even though there might be some technical terms here, we know this from our own direct experience. So we have primary eye consciousness. This is how we know shapes and colors. This is how we know objects, the visual aspect of objects. We have primary ear consciousness, primary nose, taste, and touch consciousness. And probably most important, we have a primary mental consciousness for thinking about abstract things, thinking about the future, remembering the past, thinking about abstract ideas. The interesting thing about these primary minds is that they are pure. In other words, eye consciousness doesn't have any attachment for blue and aversion to red on its own. It's just completely pure, unadulterated, uncontaminated, we could say, by itself. But what is it that leads to all these different preferences that we have? What is it that gets us into trouble with aversions? Those are what we might call mental factors or mental states. Is that a fair term? Mental factors is probably better. So what's interesting is that these mental factors come in three different varieties. And again, you'll recognize them from your own experience. There are positive mental factors. Let me back up just a minute. These primary minds simply know the bare aspect of an object. But what is it that knows the unique features of objects? That's where the mental factors come in. So positive mental factors are mental factors like loving kindness or compassion, wisdom, concentration, mindfulness, depending on the object they're focused on, I guess, integrity, consideration for others, things like that. And as I mentioned, these positive mental factors have no distortion to them. They engage an object in a very accurate way. Then the second category is I like to call it afflicted rather than negative. Afflicted implies that there's some element of distortion. And so we will never have a primary mind that is not also associated with mental factors. We'll never have a mental factor that's not also associated with these main minds. But what's interesting is that we can influence what kind of mental factors are accompanying the main minds that are in this pure aspect. So these afflicted mental factors tend to exaggerate. So, for instance, probably the ones that we're most familiar with, attachment exaggerates the positive qualities of an object. And so it's, instead of being in relationship to the actual object, now we're relating to our projection of that object onto the object. And so actually we're relating with our own images of what's out there. Same thing happens with anger. We're exaggerating the negative qualities of something or someone or some object, some situation, above and beyond what's there. And so again, instead of relating directly to the object, we're relating to our own mental projection of the object. And so that intermediary puts us out of touch with reality. And as soon as our mind is out of touch with reality, then our actions are also subject to being out of touch with reality. And then there are some neutral mental factors that are also important with the functioning of the mind, like, for instance, the omnipresent mental factors like contact, feeling, discrimination, attention, intention, contact, those sorts of things. The reason I wanted to bring these up is because really when we look at these mental factors, this is what we're trying to develop. We're trying to develop the positive mental factors when we're meditating from a Buddhist point of view. We're trying to habituate with the more positive mental states. And we're trying to reduce or even eliminate the afflicted mental states so that when these two come together, these mental factors will influence how each of these minds work, particularly the primary mental consciousness. So there's been so much research in the last, 15, 20 years on different types of meditation. We're trying to validate, from a scientific point of view, things that have been known to be true in the Buddhist worldview for 2,600 years. And a lot of that research, we are finding out, has been a bit flawed in different areas. But there's a new book out by neuroscientists Richard Davidson and Daniel Goleman called Altered Traits. Science reveals how meditation changes your mind, brain, and body. And the review I read said, in general, the authors lament the poor quality of many studies and the way these studies are used to justify mindfulness applications in many areas. Because basically, if we can sell mindfulness, then it's going to be very popular. And that's what's happened. If we were to look on Amazon, how many titles now include the word mindfulness, it would cover the whole gamut. It'd probably be in the thousands. But in this book, they help readers to separate the wheat from the chaff of mindfulness science. And they really make a strong argument that meditation in its various forms has the power to transform us, not only in temporary moments when we're meditating, but also in the long term. And that's what this term altered traits means. Traits is more of a long-term experience of personality, I think you could say. Does that sound about right? So they are trying to unveil not just the temporary effects of mindfulness training or other types of meditation, but how practicing these various forms of meditation over time affects our general traits. These are the more stable aspects of ourselves. And so there are four main ways that meditation, particularly when it's practiced consistently over time, can make a deeper impact on us. So I thought just to mention these briefly. Meditation improves our resiliency to stress. And just before coming into lunch, I heard you saying that you had noticed this in your own life experience, that meditation or the practice of Dharma in general has improved your resiliency to stress. So according to neuroscience research now, they've shown that mindfulness dampens the activity in our amygdala. Do you even know where your amygdala is? And it increases the connection between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, both of which help us to be less reactive to stressors and to recover better from stress when we experience it. So again, scientifically proven that this is happening. So these changes appear not simply during the explicit instructions when someone is perceiving a stressful stimuli, but even in the baseline state, long after a person has been involved in whatever study it was, as long as they have been doing some consistent meditation. So this is the challenge, isn't it? We all know about this research, but how consistent is our own practice in mindfulness and other types of similar meditations? Meditation increases our compassionate concern for others. So that might be obvious to us. Loving kindness meditation strengthens feelings of kindness and connection towards others. But while many of us might have compassionate attitudes towards others, we can also suffer when we see others suffering, which can create a state of paralysis or withdrawal. Especially all the news that we've been seeing. You know, I wonder if you've noticed when you read the news, do you read a headline and then turn away like, oh, can't do that today, I've done that too much lately. But studies have shown that practicing loving kindness for others increases our willingness to take action to relieve suffering. And again, it appears that by lessening amygdala activity, it's a very popular little part of our body, in the presence of suffering, while also activating circuits in the brain that are connected with good feelings and love, the cultivation of a loving concern for others, other people's well-being, increases the happiness that emerges along with compassion. So again, scientifically proven. Meditation augments our capacity to focus and pay attention. So that's not too surprising that meditation would affect our attention, since many practices focus on this very skill. But researchers have found that meditation helps to combat what they call habituation, a tendency to stop paying attention to new information in our environment, like the overload that we get from reading the news and those sorts of things. Studies have shown that improved attention seems to last up to 5 years after mindfulness training. Now, we'll have to get the book and read what was that training? How long did you have to do it to get 5 years worth of benefit from it? But it's suggesting that there are these trait-like changes that are possible. And this is really important for any activity that we're doing, whatever our job is, whatever, seeing a project to its end or staying focused on driving, many skills that we use throughout our lives. And then meditation also helps us to feel lighter and self-focused. So this is a more specific finding about how mindfulness helps you to stop seeing yourself as the center of the universe. That the part of our brains, when not busy with focused activity, ruminates on thoughts, feelings, and experience. That quiets down in long-term meditators, suggesting less rumination about ourselves and our place in the world. Wouldn't that be nice to have that as a consistent theme? So these regions very likely underlie what traditional Buddhist texts see as the root cause of suffering, attachment, and aversion, where the mind becomes fixated on wanting something that seems rewarding or getting rid of something that seems unpleasant. Meditation leads to some improvements in markers of health. There have been many claims that have been made about mindfulness and health, but sometimes these claims are hard to substantiate or are mixed up with other effects. There was a recent piece of research that was done looking at 19,000 studies that have been done on mindfulness, and actually very few of them were able to withstand the scientific rigor that's necessary to make a hard, fast claim. But there were enough of them that actually showed that practices like mindfulness-based stress reduction that John Kabat-Zinn developed many years ago have been shown to be very effective over the long term. For example, practicing meditation lessens the inflammatory response in people exposed to psychological stressors, particularly for long-term meditators. And in fact, I remember seeing some research that Dr. Davidson did where in this project they were inducing little blisters on people's arms and then looking at different groups, like a sample group and a study group of meditators. And sure enough, there was a statistically significant improvement in the people who were actually meditating on compassion for 2 weeks, only 2 weeks. So even in a very short-term amount of focus on compassion, there was a noticeable statistically significant change. So I just thought to bring this up again to remind us that really there's no difference in the nature of our mind and the nature of the mind of Buddhas. It's exactly the same. The main difference is that they've really cultivated the positive mental factors to a consummate extent. They've habituated their mind with them again and again and again. And not only have they reduced the afflicted mental states, since they're adventitious, they've also eliminated them completely, which leaves the mind in this very pure state, leading to what's called lasting happiness. The ultimate state of lasting happiness is enlightenment. I hope this is helpful.